Welcome to Literal BS, the podcast where we unravel the complex threads that weave through our society. I'm your host, Rob, and today we're tackling a profound shift in public consciousness, one that challenges our fundamental understanding of authority and protection. For generations, the military and law enforcement stood as unwavering symbols of heroism, guardians of peace, and defenders of our nation. But in recent years, for many, that image has fractured, replaced by a growing perception of them as agents of oppression. Especially today, it's a stark transformation. How did we get from parades celebrating our heroes to protesting demanding justice? Today, we'll explore the multifaceted reasons behind this seismic shift, delving into historical context, the impact of significant events, and the ever-present influence of media and evolving societal values. Let's begin by setting the historical stage. For much of the 20th century, particularly after monumental conflicts like World War II, the military held an almost sacred place in the American psyche. They were the brave men and women who fought tyranny, defended democracy, and brought peace to a war-torn world. Veterans were revered, and military service was often seen as the ultimate act of patriotism. Similarly, local law enforcement, while always having its challenges, largely operated under a narrative of community protection. The image of the friendly neighborhood police officer dedicated to keeping the streets safe and solving crimes was deeply embedded. This was the era of officer-friendly, where police were seen as an approachable and essential part of the social fabric. This wasn't accidental, it was carefully cultivated through storytelling, Hollywood depictions, and our shared memories of victory against common enemies. People had faith in these institutions, and criticism usually focused on isolated scandals rather than questioning the entire system. This wasn't accidental, it was carefully cultivated through storytelling, Hollywood depictions, and our shared memories of victory against common enemies. People had faith in these institutions, and criticism usually focused on isolated scandals rather than questioning the entire system. But what caused this dramatic reversal? How did we transition from broad institutional respect to widespread public wariness, anxiety, and sometimes outright hostility? The story is multifaceted, a complex tapestry of converging trends spanning multiple decades. Take policing and the phenomenon often labeled police militarization. Though not entirely new, this trend gained serious momentum after September 11th. Anti-terrorism efforts funneled enormous stockpiles of military surplus. Everything from battle-ready vehicles and combat rifles to sophisticated monitoring equipment directly from federal arsenals to neighborhood precincts. This military hardware didn't just alter aesthetics, it reshaped operational culture. Special weapons and tactics units, traditionally deployed for exceptional emergencies like kidnappings, became standard for ordinary police work, narcotics investigations, warrant executions, and routine enforcement. The public increasingly encountered officers equipped like infantry soldiers during street patrols, crowd control, and even basic traffic encounters. The transformation was stark. These figures no longer resembled familiar neighborhood protectors but appeared as occupation forces. This tactical evolution frequently brought attitudinal changes, a combative perspective that made confrontation more probable than peaceful resolution. Compounding this militarization has been the undeniable and tragically frequent occurrences of high-profile incidents of police brutality. While such incidents have always occurred, the advent of smartphones and social media has created an unprecedented level of visibility. No longer are these events confined to local news reports or hushed whispers. They are captured on video, shared globally within minutes, and replayed endlessly, forcing a raw and undeniable confrontation with the reality of excessive force. Think of the impact of images like the Rodney King beating in 1991, which ignited widespread outrage, or more recently, the murder of George Floyd in 2020, which sparked a global reckoning on racial injustice and policing. These aren't isolated events. They are often seen as emblematic of systemic issues, particularly regarding racial bias and disproportionate use of force against Black and brown communities. The historical roots of policing, for instance, in slave patrols and the enforcement of Jim Crow laws, resurfaced in public discourse, adding layers of historical context to contemporary grievances. The perception of a lack of accountability and transparency further erodes trust. When officers involved in controversial incidents are not prosecuted or when internal investigations are perceived as insufficient, the public's faith in the system's ability to self-correct diminishes. Legal doctrines like qualified immunity, which protects government officials from liability in civil lawsuits unless their conduct violates established statutory or constitutional rights, are often seen as barriers to justice, reinforcing the idea that police are above the law. Now, let's shift our focus to the military. Their image, too, has been reshaped primarily by prolonged and often controversial interventions abroad. After the unequivocal victories of World War II, the military entered the latter half of the 20th century with immense public goodwill. However, the Vietnam War marked a turning point. A protracted, seemingly unwinnable conflict marred by high casualties, accusations of atrocities like My Lai, and a growing public perception of government deception deeply fractured trust. Soldiers returning home were often met with indifference or even hostility, a stark contrast to earlier generations. The post-9/11 War on Terror, with its sustained engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan, further complicated this narrative. While the initial response to 9/11 united the nation, the subsequent wars, lasting for 2 decades, became increasingly unpopular. Questions arose about the intelligence that led to the invasion of Iraq, the effectiveness of nation-building efforts, and the ultimate goals of these conflicts. The human cost, both in American lives and the lives of civilians in war zones, alongside the immense financial burden, fueled public fatigue and skepticism about military interventions. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan further solidified doubts for many about the efficacy and wisdom of these prolonged engagements. The military's occasional involvement in domestic affairs, such as the deployment of the National Guard during civil unrest, can also contribute to this shift. While often intended to restore order, the sight of armed troops on American streets can be jarring and is sometimes perceived as an overreach, especially by those protesting government actions. It blurs the lines between internal security and external defense, making it harder to distinguish between the roles of soldier and police officer in the public mind. These are separate developments that don't exist in isolation. They converge to reshape how Americans view institutional power and its exercise. The transformation hinges on a fundamental shift in perception. Institutions once trusted to serve the public interest now appear to many as forces acting against it. Consider the cumulative effect. Militarized police forces responding to civil unrest with combat gear. High-profile cases of police misconduct where justice seems delayed or denied. Military deployments in overseas conflicts that drag on without clear victories or endpoints. Together, these experiences fuel a growing conviction that powerful institutions have turned from protectors into oppressors. Political rhetoric amplifies these concerns. When leaders describe domestic protesters as enemies or frame policy disagreements as wars to be won, they reinforce an adversarial dynamic between government and governed. This combative language can justify harsh tactics to supporters while deepening alienation among critics. Social media has fundamentally accelerated this transformation. Previous generations relied on traditional news outlets to interpret events. Now, every smartphone owner can document and broadcast reality in real time. This democratization of information means official narratives face constant challenge from eyewitness accounts and alternative perspectives. While this creates opportunities for misinformation, it also amplifies previously silenced voices and enables rapid organization around shared grievances. Today's young adults approach authority with inherent skepticism rather than deference. Armed with historical awareness and contemporary examples, they demand transparency and accountability from institutions their parents might have trusted implicitly. This critical perspective, shaped by both past injustices and present concerns, naturally leads to fundamental questions about how power should be exercised in a democratic society. This institutional transformation becomes even more troubling when we examine how these same dynamics play out in immigration enforcement, an area where the shift from protection to persecution has profound human consequences. Across the country, we're witnessing federal agencies, local police, and occasionally military personnel deploying tactics that can only be described as manhunts targeting undocumented immigrants. This aggressive approach represents both a moral failure and a dangerous departure from established legal principles, one that carries unmistakable racial undertones. Make no mistake, every sovereign nation maintains the right to secure its borders and uphold its laws. Yet the methods we choose reveal who we are as a society. The current strategy relies on militarized raids, mass detentions, and family separations that inflict devastating trauma while breeding fear throughout entire communities. This fear prevents people from seeking healthcare, reporting crimes, or engaging with the very institutions meant to protect them, ultimately undermining public safety for everyone. What makes this approach particularly unconscionable is its targeting of individuals whose only violation is a civil immigration infraction, not a criminal offense. When we treat these people with the same severity reserved for violent criminals, conducting raids in their homes and workplaces before deporting them without adequate legal protections, we abandon both proportionality and compassion. We reduce human beings to quarry in a hunt, stripping away their dignity and often exiling them to countries they barely remember, leaving them without support or resources. The racial dimensions of this enforcement cannot be overlooked. Immigration law enforcement has historically and continues to disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities, revealing patterns of systemic bias that persist today. When enforcement consistently targets specific racial and ethnic groups, it exposes the gap between equal justice under law and the reality of selective persecution. The fundamental truth is this: a humane alternative exists. We can maintain legal order while respecting human dignity, constitutional protections, and proportional justice. Our Constitution explicitly guarantees due process rights to all persons, not merely citizens. This means undocumented immigrants deserve fair treatment under law, including access to legal representation, the opportunity to present their cases, and protection from unreasonable government intrusion. As we conclude today's discussion, I want to leave you with a question that should keep us all awake at night. When did we become a nation that hunts the vulnerable instead of harboring them? When did our institutions transform from shields into swords? The Bible speaks directly to this moment in our history. In Leviticus 19 verses 33 to 34, we read, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt." Yet today we witness the very opposite: systematic mistreatment of those seeking refuge and opportunity. We see power wielded not to protect the innocent, but to terrorize communities. We've allowed fear to override our foundational principles of justice and mercy. Hebrews 13 verse 2 reminds us, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." How many angels have we turned away? How many have we hunted down in raids and separated from their families? The prophet Isaiah warns us in chapter 10, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people." This isn't just about immigration policy, it's about the soul of our nation. When agencies designed to uphold justice transform into engines of persecution, when officers who vowed to serve their communities resemble hostile occupiers, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. What have we become as a people? We can accept this trajectory toward institutional violence and ethical collapse, or we can reclaim the understanding that lasting security flows not from fortifications and force, but from equity, kindness, and the bravery to stand for truth when it costs us something. The question isn't whether we possess the means to change direction. It's whether we can endure the consequences of staying the course. Until next time, don't remain a spectator, become a participant. The survival of our democracy depends on your response.